Welcome back, everybody. Today we are discussing Severance Season 2 and the brand new trailer that released on December 7th. This would have been out a little bit sooner, but my company had a Christmas party the night before, and I needed to let everybody know that I was the best dancer there. I'm not sure why, but I do know that that is going to do wonders for my career. But jumping into it, we need to acknowledge that nearly 3 years have gone by since the first episode of Severance came out, and the trailers need to, above all else, remind the audience why they should care, why we should come back and revisit this and include this into our lives again. To do this, I think the official trailer intends to remind us of the mysteries going on that make us scratch our heads and keep pressing play so that we can figure them out. I have come to 6 main questions that I think they want us to focus on, but many more exist outside of this, and there were some that I kind of debated including and not. But ultimately, I would love to hear your questions in the comments, at the end of this video, see what remains, what we still need to speculate about, and so on and so forth. The first question this trailer hopes to remind us of, though, is: what are they doing?
Their work will be remembered as one of the greatest moments of this planet.
Since the very first episode, we have been chasing this answer like a fat pig looking at an extra juicy carrot. What does macrodata refinement actually do? Now, if you've been watching my breakdowns, I'm sure that you heard the grandiose nature in which their purpose is affirmed in this trailer. It's something for the entirety of humanity, something that won't be understood right now, but looking back will be obvious that this was the important work being done in this era. So, what is it? Well, of course we don't know. That's why the trailer intends to remind us of this, but I'm sure that you're all ready for this speculation. So if we go back to Season 1, Episode 3, In Perpetuity, we hear these similar tones. The severed workers that we know and love are visiting a museum, the Perpetuity Wing that honors the Egan family and their greatness and reminds them directly how impactful their work is. We hear from Myrtle Egan that their work will one day change the world.
Anyone working in this Lumen family, what you are is the keeper of an ethos, a compact of values that we have long held as precious, and which I do believe will one day save this world.
Which was said directly after this line from Keir Egan.
I walked into the cave of my own mind, and there I tamed them. Should you tame the tempers as I did mine, then the world shall become but your appendage. It is this great and consecrated power that I hope to pass on to all of you, my children.
I believe the trailer homes us once again in the large scope of the Egan family, and that what macrodata refinement is actually doing is taming tempers, or something similar to Keir Egan's adventure and path through life, and to achieve something of enlightenment. They are the case study for how this path of enlightenment could be possible, and if Lumen is able to do that through the macrodata refinement process, as in the workers are refining their own large-scale information and data, they could, in theory, enlighten the entire world, teach everybody how to be the perfect version of themselves. However, we have reason to suspect that the mantras at Lumen have changed since the start of this process, and as far as we know, Keir Egan wasn't alive when Severing started. So it's possible that these are the good intentions of Lumen, right? And that under capitalism, it's leading us down a different, less altruistic path. Like we saw with the senator and his pregnant wife, they are already selling this service to the wealthy without the working class knowing that it's even possible. More than likely, the grand goals could relate to the idea of creating perfect people, but will follow the same course that history often does, and that story often does. Of course, looking at Hitler, right? The worst humanity has to offer is delivered by those with the best intentions. And if this story follows that path, I can see the breadcrumbs already. But the trailer isn't that strong with it, right? It's about setting the scale. It's about setting the scope. It needs to remind us that macrodata refinement is still largely unknown, but they outright confirm that their work is for the planet. As a 1.5 question here, we have to consider that if those intentions are good, and if good intentions even matter if you're trying to conform a species to your ideology. I think most fifth graders could probably answer that question, but there is something really interesting about the possibility. Imagine season 2 ends with this course to enlightenment and it being acknowledged that that is what this is and it working. And then season 2 doesn't follow a Westworld route where it's like the early stages of this new world coming to exist. We are just suddenly thrown into a completely severed lifestyle that, fourth wall break here, already mirrors our own. Also, this line is delivered by this man, Mr. Drummond. I think I said that right, who we only know from the subtitles on the trailer. I love that they did this because this information is private information on the set, and including this could have only ever been a purposeful thing meant for the people who are absolutely looking for it. Most people would not care. It isn't needed, but now we have someone to speculate about and don't have to refer to him as the dude from the trailer. But let's keep it moving. The second question is, what happens to macro data refinement after their grand finale farce from season 1?
Scout. I know you're still weighing whether to return to Lumen, but the mark I've come to know is happy.
It would seem that Mr. Milchek telling Audi Mark that any Mark is happy does quite a lot, as we then see any Mark making a mad dash for the manager's room and screaming into the mythical talk box, wanting to speak to the board. The other thing to consider is the organization that was helping Petey.
There's a group of people that know Severance is a blight on mankind, and they're going to do something about it.
By the end of the first season, we know that Ragabi has been exposed, but we don't know the organization at large still. I wonder if after this grand moment, they don't reach out to Mark and ask if he would do as Petey did and go back into the office in order to continue Any Mark's adventures. Any Mark may be the best way to take down the corporation, and maybe that's why we see Any Mark somehow back in the building, still trying to fight the powers that be.
Okay, so we're not in trouble?
I don't think so. Milchik said we're famous.
Which then brings us to this wonderful image that gives us a great deal about the weight of their moment.
What you all did was one of the most painful moments in the history of this company.
This looks to be at the entrance of the severed floor, meaning that they would see it every day that they came in until O&D changed it to another. It likely wouldn't be good for morale, but since management is taking the approach that they are the heroes, the painting could represent them in a more positive light as well. So let's dive into this. I see 5 major parts here. The workers buried up to their necks, Kier with a halo around his head with a soft hand on one of the workers, a dark power looming in the shadows, standing at the ready, a factory with a pillar of light, which I believe is coming from the factory instead of going to it from above, and the fifth thing being the source of light on the wall here. I want to start with the light. To me, it represents the sun or some kind of holy power. It's divine in nature and hanging over their heads as if they were plants, and the sun was calling them to grow from the soil. Kier, the kind gardener that needs to be sure that they produce fruit and holding a blade to cut any weeds that conspire against the yield. I believe this is Dylan, Helly, Irving, and Mark. I think the light around his head mirrors old Renaissance paintings doing the same, where they would show that this character is an angel or God or Jesus himself. I think this speaks to how Lumen and the Egan family views themselves and their intentions more than anything. I think the factory in the background is Lumen Industries, and the style is meant to make it look like an older factory in order to remind us of the ether factory that started all of this. The light is the ideology, and I believe the light is coming from the factory because they are trying to emulate the divine lights or thoughts or philosophy from above. They believe that what they are doing is larger than life, akin to the creation of man itself, and they are acting as the beacon to guide people on the path of righteousness. No degree of hubris left on any table. Another way I want to consider this is that the sun is not actually the sun, but a clock. The center framing away from everything else mirrors the way that we see clocks on the severed floor. Of course, this could be nothing, or it could hint at exactly how their master plan will unfold. Going back to the Perpetuity Wing, we see these quotes here about the remembered man. In my episode breakdown, I talk about the scene in length, but here I just want to highlight that immortality could be a large part of that plan, or remembering the history, or bringing back, people from the dead kind of thing, or existing in a new way that we don't currently think of that also escapes our fated time on Earth. The soldiers in the background could be showing us that Lumen is ready to fight should the world need another great war, which, now that I think about it, could be why the very first episode mentions this little note about the Great War.
The people actually called it the Great War. Apparently, it would have been a faux pas to have called it World War I.
All right.
Well,
But I think more than likely the Great War is already going on. It's the senators and it's the lobbyists that are trying to convince the world to roll over before anybody realizes their way of life is under attack. The guns and their possibly severed bayonets could be metaphorical, but I believe one day in the history of humanity, a company will start amassing land and militia and forever change the way we consider governments. This story highlighting that could also have some great power if they don't go the route of, the war being an entirely philosophical or a war that is battled out in the courtroom and the Senate floor above everything else, right? The people being buried in the sand, being Mark, Irving, Helly, and Dylan is also pretty wild to me. Of course, they don't look exactly like them, but when we consider that this man is being named Mark W., I think it paints a pretty wild picture about what it means to be a Mark, an Irving, a Helly, or a Dylan, which I admit is quite a Dylan thing to say, I know. If there is an A through Z version of every character and collectively they are taming their tempers to achieve a grander understanding of their own selves, that could be kind of cool. It would also match up with the O&D department having A through Z for all these different machines, and it's not really explained. Something is going on here with the naming, and if this represents the complete enlightened Mark as opposed to the singular Mark S, I think that would be kind of cool and explain why they look so similar to the people that we know and love. One last thing about the painting is this watchtower. It seems to be purposefully placed here. I think it could speak to the eye in the sky thing happening in the background a little bit, where the Lumen logo could be a camera. Surveillance is a big part of the Severed Floor, and cameras in these kinds of stories have a great weight. The watchtower tells me that they're carefully studying their surroundings and well defended behind thick iron-like walls. Also, consider the water tower that sits in front of the Lumen building as kind of like juxtaposition to this, right? It's not behind the walls, it's out in front, it's doing the same thing. Or, I'm sorry, it could be doing the exact same thing, but it's a water tower, right? Imagine if every water tower was actually a secret monitoring facility. Who's checking? Who's ever seen inside of a water tower? You haven't. Listener, loser. I'm just kidding. One last thing about this real fast. All right, real fast. What is actually happening to them is something called immurement. This is an ancient torture or imprisonment method where you would leave only their head exposed. Their beaten faces and slightly reddish tint on the blade does a good job of highlighting that this is absolutely their punishment. But their bodies being trapped while their minds are actively free is already what is happening. It's what Severance is. The Severed Floor is the immurement. So while I think it's fair to say that this painting could represent the punishment that they will receive for what they did in season 1, I think it's meant to misdirect us because they are already buried underneath of the Lumen building. That's why I view this as Kier being the ideological gardener above everything else. I don't think it's about the punishment at all, really. He's not forcefully bending this person's head down for execution. He's making sure that he is pointed in the right direction, like all of them looking directly at Kier. Going back to the original question in this section, what happens to the team after their final stunt? Well, we know that they're back inside and they're facing the consequences of their actions. We know from the scene at the end, at some point, they are separated from each other. And we know that one of the ways they are going to try and keep them pushing that boulder, that Sisyphusian boulder, is by convincing them that they are heroes. Which brings us to the newspaper. First and foremost, let's discuss if it is real or not. I know this is a hot topic, lots of different takes here. I'm sorry, CSL, but it's not real. If I was a gambling man, I would wager as much. It's very much another tool for the manipulation of severed workers by management in a playbook that we have yet to see, in the same way that we saw them using the macro data refinement calamity in episode 5 that was even numbered as though it were an audible football call.
You ran a 266 on Irving B?
Yeah. Mr. Milchick is giving them this as a way to show their work is valuable and likely to help explain why they are still down there working. It cannot all be for naught, and assuming it's not possible to wipe their severed brains and start over like it was their first day here, they would need to create some story that makes them once again conform to their subterranean imprisonment without a daily call to arms to dismantle the people wielding the power. He tells them that on the outside they have done great things, and because of what they have done personally, the world is changing for all severed workers. They are the face of severance reform.
Okay, so we're not in trouble?
I don't think so. Milchick said we're famous.
All of us equally, or one of us is like the star?
Which is just so perfect because they show Helly here in order to remind us that Helly would likely be the face of severance reform given her public outburst and overall role in the company. But Dylan was the true hero who stayed behind in order to let the others be free. He's wondering if he is actually getting the credit that he deserves. But I really feel like this is also meant to deceive. Lumen likely covered all of this up and denied everything and managed to spin a story about how this was a stunt by the Whole Mind Collective, if I had to guess anything at all. The newspaper here shows us them being carted through the city on a parade with security. It feels so out of place and likely photoshopped. The term innies being used on the front page after it was acknowledged as a pejorative term on national television also makes me think that this is fake. The innies wouldn't know that it was a bad word, and the world wouldn't come out to say thank you. It's again the same grandiose mental that believes their work is that important. The biggest thing that disproves this for me that this is real is this note about Rickon. The benediction was delivered by Dr. Rickon Hale, author of such hits as The UUR and These Values 9, How I Let Kier In. It is interesting. Now, I have spoken before about how Rickon could be a repeat of Kier and how his outlandish words could represent how Lumen bastardized Kier Egan's original text in order to create an ideology that directly benefits them and their pockets. I don't think it's that, right? I don't think that Rickon is actually following a religious path of Kier at all. I think this is Lumen reflecting on how this severed floor got so out of hand that it literally staged a coup, and were able to trace that back to Miss Cobell bringing in a stolen contraband item book inside of this severed floor and it getting loose and it affecting everybody. Season 1 was filled with moments of people slipping away and reading this book. They show Mark directly reflecting on this book in moments of uncertainty. I think the people that remained after Miss Cobell was fired understood the damage that this book did or used it as a scapegoat and need the innies to feel like the book aligns more with the handbook than they first believed and when they first read it. If this book actually exists, I don't think it was written by Rickon, but I think it may be shown in season 2 as an approved book with Rickon's face on it, and they're going to spin it as like the UUR was the first copy that needed to be reworked, right? Like it was kind of radical. I think the whole thing is just another form of manipulation, but they could be allowed to read this new book and it could have a line on the inside that says, the UUR was an immature thing, right? I was in my infancy of being an author, and they could pretend that Rickon was sharing how Kier has helped him see the light of such a period of buffoonery in his life. It would be an ingenious way to make them stop focusing on the words that influenced them to rebel. Plus, they already fired Miss Cobell, so Mr. Milchick, who is actually the person most responsible for why they were reading the words so freely, would still be allowed to continue working there. And I think that is how that plays out, right? We're seeing another book in the story. The first book has such like big monumental things that need to be resolved or addressed, and I think that is how you address those things. I think it's how I would do it, though it's just a theory, right? I still don't believe you just forget about this book and Mr. Milchick's actions being weird can be traced back to the original Helly incident, but that's for another time as well. The newspaper also tells us that this continuing background story of the Baird Creek Bandit is still going on. This has been hidden in the background since the start, and I do want to do a little dedicated short video about it if I have time for season 2, but it's just a mysterious home invader who steals things from the community that Mark lives in while everybody else is at work. It could be anybody that we don't see in the office, but Rickon and Devin seem to be the most likely candidates. Looking at you again, Giant Glass House. The newspaper also mentions the 4 severed workers by name, which if this was a paper from the outside, it wouldn't do because it's not Mark S. on the outside. It talks about them all giving speeches, talks about the board listening to them, about how big of a show it was with like these performers, which is, it's just so weird. Mr. Milchick's name, it can also be seen in some like right there after some of the image altering that I did to make this a little more clear, I hope. Top of the line says the recreational facilities, sexual liberation, improved snacks, and the possibility for something that starts with an F, maybe field, like visiting a field, which could relate to the goat thing, though it could also not say field. I don't really know. We can see a scientific researcher, something at Lumen Industries, his research to changing the way we recycle plastic, repurpose plastic, and in a divine moment last week, science found a way to fix our plastic pileup, which does not sound like any paper that would actually exist. Science found a way to fix our plastic pileup. I mean, maybe. I guess I'll give that the benefit of the doubt, but divinity, how does that relate, right? It's just, I don't know. There's no way that this is real. Their work relating to plastic could be a story for the innies to stop questioning all the time what they do now. If they knew the work was them saving the world from microplastics being in every single thing that we consume nowadays, that could make them want to stay and work, because they're the heroes. And because of that, they get to be rewarded with the knowledge of their great contributions to humanity. And the reason that it was behind Cloak and Dagger is because, it was still up in the air about what was really happening. We see more stuff about legislation affecting Lumen, which I do believe is a real battle because they are facing the 4 states, to my knowledge, still trying to ban the procedure. Also, the senator being introduced as a person directly benefiting from the company's success speaks largely about how important the political game is for Lumen. We see new technology elevates, gone are the days of plastic bottle to another bottle, something about the composition of plastic molecules during the process, the polyethylene, something more commonly known as plastic, something more nonsense, I think, but it would be quite amazing if their actual goals did relate to this in some kind of way. Polyethylene is used in knee replacements and other surgeries, and if you were actually trying to make organs or entire bodies out of polyethylene to extend the human lifespan to avoid the real end of life that our human cells currently have, I think that could be cool. It could make sense, but it's just a wild theory to share with your friends and coworkers who did not ask for your theories. Freezer cools the plastic to something Celsius at this temperature, something, unlikely combustion something. This innovation safely separates the elements without releasing any hazardous gases. Some of these words are hard to see. Forgive me if it's not correct at all, but I think that makes the most sense. They are highlighting how this process is different and going into the details for what entirely could be a facade to convince the innies that they are doing important things. It's a lot of information, is my point here, because I feel like that would be a cool way to hint at the actual going on here, while also hiding it in plain sight for what could be just a facade for the innies. And we see clearly, episode 1, that the outside world, the story does not exist like this. There was never a newspaper talking about plastics, so why go so in depth about the plastics here unless you were kind of maybe hinting at the grander scale of things without giving too much away. This feels like something for the audience to speculate about, or just to know the name polyethylene for some kind of reason. Then finally, Lumen, something. The license plate here says 97926, which, if that's a real date, I don't know what to say. But yeah, I mean, this is what happens to the team after their stunt. They are forced to return. They are given stories and media to honor the moment. It's spun to continue their important and mysterious work, and I think given some insight into their work in order to keep them pushing, said Boulder.
So what the hell did you guys see up there?
They do get to talk to each other and share what they witnessed in this private moment, perhaps showing us that they also got the harsh restrictions that Miss Cobell put in place removed. Like the doors, they can go through the hallways again, they can have these private moments. And I think that I think that aligns, right? You don't want to continue punishing the workers if you're trying to tell them that they took a risk, but it did in fact align with Kier's values and they were doing the right thing. They should follow their heart more, yada, 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 but then keep them in line. They do get to share their thoughts.
It's not our world up there.
Which does give some insight into how Irving is feeling, but we'll talk more about him a little bit later. The next massive part of this trailer is Miss Casey.
My Audie's wife died a few years ago, except the woman is Miss Casey.
We hear Devin telling Mark that she is still alive and some resistance by Mark being given at this moment.
Mark, your Annie said she's alive.
This is obscene.
I just want to be sure.
And this moment appears to carry the weight that Mark knows about Gemma being alive and on the inside, but she's alive was the exact thing that he screamed, and not Gemma is alive. And it's the exact thing that she is saying right here, not Gemma is alive, just she's alive. Her repeating the line instead of mentioning his late wife feels intended. There could be some misdirection happening here, but most directly, I think it's showing us that Devin wants to probe into Lumen, and Audi Mark is refusing to believe her for either the Gemma thing or, something else entirely.
Mark, your Annie said she's alive.
This is obscene.
I just want to be sure.
We know that any Mark has put all of the pieces together and intends to help Miss Casey / Mark's wife break out of here.
So what are you going to do?
I gotta get her out of here.
It is a bold statement, and I wonder how Lumen intends to squash this further rebellion. I think it's safe to assume that they are watching them much closer than they were before, and likely hear the whispers of Miss Casey being their next target of liberation, but I guess we'll just have to wait and find out.
If we let this happen to Miss Casey, who's gonna step up when it happens to us?
Which brings us to question number 4. What is Lumen up to? The trailer does a fantastic job of showcasing the weight of Lumen's power. They invoke these ideas that Miss Cobell could have known about Gemma's death.
Why did you do this? What is this all about?
Do you know something about Gemma?
They show us Audi Helly telling Miss Cobell that they fear no one.
You don't value them. You fear them. We fear no one.
And then, of course, show us wild imagery of the goats and this little girl ruling the department like Miss Cobell was meant to. I love that it is a child, by the way. That is just so powerful in stories like these. Read 1984 and tell me you don't fear having children in that story, and see how easily children could be used in positions of management when it's just a faithful body telling lessers what the higher ups told them because they were only raised in a certain way and it was that way. This feels like she could be the most dutiful manager yet, with some tendency for cruelty that may not even be intended, but is like it's a job, and a job has to be done. And she was only ever taught how to do the job, not care for her peers or elders, as the tension with the final remark helps us show some kind of disconnect already there.
My name is Miss Huang. It's my first day here as deputy manager. Mark W.
Why are you a child?
Because of when I was born.
I have long thought that Lumen could have something to do with Gemma's death, and I love that it is so plainly being told to us here, so that we have to consider that moving forward. Looking at you again, graveyards leading to Lumen housing. I'm on to you. You have not escaped my memory. The goats will be my 6th question, so let's talk about that then. But in terms of what Lumen is up to, it's everything that I've already said. We are meant to go into this new season realizing Lumen's power, realizing that we have no idea what's going on, and I think that they just want us to highlight that Lumen in and of itself is one of the biggest questions that we still face. Which brings us to question number 5. What happens to Miss Cobell?
Why did you do this? What is this all about?
We know she got fired last season and is likely replaced by this little girl, but more specifically, we see her leaving her home and getting stopped by Mark. I take this as her trying to escape to avoid the questions of why she pretended to be recommended by Mark in order to watch Devin's newborn, as well as...
Do you know something about Gemma?
She says in this trailer that Mark is not heading for a honeymoon ending, and we see images of a peaceful light on Gemma's face. More likely than not, I think this is a memory, or maybe it's showing us a flashback to how life was before she died. Maybe those were the moments of ecstasy and bliss that ultimately led to them still not having children, which, if my theories from episode 6 are correct, is something that Lumen cares about in some capacity. You know, honeymoon, consummating your marriage kind of thing. Maybe the honeymoon remark relates to that, but ultimately just a theory. We then see Miss Cobell about to be talked to by Mr. Drummond and Helly, and I take this as them being members of the board or just another cog in the machine that must be revealed in order to continue the hierarchy of who is responsible. Miss Cobell failed after putting the blame on Mark for Helly's incident, and now Helly has led to Mark, has led to her being fired, and now Mr. Drummond must talk to outside Helly to talk to Miss Cobell, right? We know that Miss Cobell is loyal to this company, and I do hope she continues in this story. Her being outed from the company that she devoted her entire life to since she was a child in the Myrtle Egan Girls' School is massive. I think that girls' school was one of the first attempts to share the Egan ideology with the world, and Miss Cobell may have some inherent value still left to give. Even after the slip-ups, it might be that she is fired from Lumen, but is allowed to continue in another Egan organization doing something, maybe something specifically with children, as she took an interest to that in season 1. So the trailer does make it seem like Miss Cobell will be suffering the consequences of the actions that have happened, but let's not forget that a lot of the blame, a great deal of the blame, is on Mr. Milchek, and we haven't seen him getting any kind of slack for anything. He just escaped the hierarchy entirely, and I wonder if that is because he's a side character, which I don't think, or he is truly the one who is in management making some masterful plays here, which we speculate in some theory videos. But I think that we know generally what happens to Miss Cobell going into season 2. Yeah, I don't want her to be out of the story. So let me just say, everything that I'm talking about, I'm doing it through the confirmation bias that she continues in the story. I feel like she has a weight similar to like Anthony Hopkins in the first season of Westworld. She is powerful, kind of all-knowing at times, but also a little unhinged, and I think it would be a shame to not have her in the story in the same exact way that it was a shame that Anthony Hopkins did not continue as Dr. Ford in Westworld. But we come to question 6 as the final question. What is up with the goats? I don't know. I think this scene here where we see Mark saying,
If we let this happen to Miss Casey, who's gonna step up when it happens to us?
is quite telling. These are people that we don't know, and assuming they all know Miss Casey because they're, witnessing the speech, I'm guessing that these are all of the other people on this severed floor of this single Lumen building that Miss Casey would have, had some wellness treatments with, possibly. Maybe management invited everybody to a little meet and greet as Mark and team made it clear that they wanted to be able to work together with Macro Data Refinement and O&D, and that was a big part of season 1 and why we couldn't work together. This room looks like the same room as the one with the goat, and I think this divine figure ringing a bell will be a member of O&D, as noted by the badge, also this member here. I think that she is calling everybody after Mark once again tried to rally the masses. I think maybe that is when this figure emerges and publicly beats Mark for speaking out like this. I don't know. It's probably not that. It's probably weirder. But unless this happened later in the season, I don't know how these pieces are coming together just yet. Who are these people in the background? What is happening here? It would also be interesting if this was a way for management to pat themselves on the back and say, see, this is why we wanted the departments to be separate, so that when you were punished, it wasn't in front of all of your peers or something. Again, just a guess. It's something that may only be obscure for the sake of symbolic reasons. Or it could just be obscure for the sake of being obscure. Like, not everything needs an answer, but it does seem like this is one of those shows, right? We see them talking earlier about Mark's wife being dead, and then this projector, which I think links to this moment when Irving is laughing at someone who looks like him going all heat miser, or some animation that I can't remember from when I was a kid. I was trying to find this exact moment, but I couldn't. But this animation is like a 1-to-1 from what I remember from a Christmas movie when I was a kid. Someone let me know which movie that is. It also looks like macro data refinement based on the ceiling. So if I had to guess, they are watching the story of what happened here. It seems like Irving is losing his cool in some kind of way, and that is a story that's being shared either maybe just with them or with the other departments about what happened, about the the grand thing that led to reform for all of the innies that are now benefiting, assuming any of them actually are. And if they do want to sell the story that they are truly that truly happened, then I think that's why we see these background characters and these new things, like this new environment. Like, there are consequences. They have achieved something, and they are this rallying force. Whatever this is Irving, and the conversation connects to them in this larger room with Goats. Mark trying to rally downtrodden troops to save the therapist they all care about for some reason. It really feels like the Goats are just that, like they're goats. They're maybe a reward for good behavior. They could point at them and say, see, like, our plan was to get the teams together and enjoy something new. You just needed to trust us while we got goat yoga, situaated. We weren't doing weird goat stuff, I promise. It also feels like the missing persons posters were meant for these other people to find. And maybe this is, it's so obscure. This is so crazy. Why would Lumen allow these to be printed? Where could they even be hung that Mr. Milchek or O&D wouldn't take them down? Is this a moment that only happens in the trailer because it's odd? Like, do they run around and give these out? Like, are they posting them on the walls for the people they never cross paths with, like, in the hallway? Like, it's weird. I don't know. I'm not sure. But they do want us to focus on the Goats for some reason in this new trailer and going into season 2. But as we finish this breakdown, I have a little more things, a couple scenes that I wanted to add here. We do see Mr. Milchek in biker safety gear in this shot of a motorcycle out front, meaning the other teaser stuff that showed someone on a motorcycle, it was him. Mr. Milchek will be a big focus of the season, and I love that. He is a wild card for me, and I cannot wait to see where his story leads. The shot of Mark trying to connect to the board directly shows us the weird painting that I have nothing else to say, but it also shows us this bonsai plant that looks like a well taken care of and expensive thing. Someone who actually knows anything about bonsai, please confirm. But I think the reason you put this plant in the manager's office is because you're telling us that they enjoy taking care of miniature, tiny little versions of things. They are carefully tending to a plant in a container, like Mark S., who could be 1/24th of the complete Mark they hope to create. The Mark planted in the soil, being warmed by Kier Egan's light and tended to by sharp blades whenever they grow in a direction that you don't care for. They could also just be plastic trees sitting in the corner for decoration, and I think that would be funny now too. But with that, I believe that we have come to the end of the trailer. I have no idea the context in which this image right here came to exist, and I think Audi Helly is enjoying watching her relationship with Mark through the cameras above, but really no telling. Much love, everybody. Please be sure to check out my Patreon and support the content that is going into season 2. We are just about ready. We have 3 more reviews. The next one is almost done, and then I'm going to hopefully be able to make individual theory videos about some of the more wide-known theories that you can find on the wiki, as well as some of the Discord channels that I link and enjoy in the description below. But again, much love, everybody. Please hit that subscribe, and I cannot wait to talk to you all again soon. Also, Ben Stiller, best friend, BFFFF. You talked recently about a podcast, and I didn't get an email or anything from you. I'm not offended, all right? But I'm just saying that I could, in theory, in practice, in reality, be a part of the Whole Mind Collective and join your podcast at random times, fully believing that I know everything about what's happening inside of Lumen, and be truly just a character who shares wild theories with, that feel in universe, but are also for the audience at large here. Let me know. Ben Stiller, best friend, BFF.